Today I'm going to take you through an example using Superior Drummer 2 and some plugins from Waves to give you some ideas about how to mix drums inside of Pro Tools. So here we go. Here's the basic Pro Tools session that I have set up. I have created an instrument track here, and I have my master track, and then this is just a track with my voice for the video coming through. So we're going to use Superior Drummer 2. You can open that up if you have it. As an instrument track. Alright. Now depending on how many expansion packs you have, the normal Superior Drummer 2 software just comes with the Avatar library, and then I've purchased several other ones, including some EasyX's, and then these are the SDX's. I'm going to just use the Avatar library today as an example. Now, I'm just going to go for a kind of an all-purpose general pop rock drum sound today that can be used, for many different styles of music, from kind of just like acoustic sound to more heavy rock, and anything in between. It might also have some uses, if you're going to use acoustic drums in more urban styles of music as well. So here we go. What I'm first going to do is use the built-in grooves. This is like the MIDI library inside of Superior Drummer to just get a simple drum performance going on. When you are making a song or something like that, going and searching out, exactly what MIDI files you want to use is a good idea. I'm just going to pull a couple different random ones from the Avatar library just to get something basic going on and show you how to do that. Let me switch over in Pro Tools here to the edit window and show you the functionality of just building up your drum track. What I'm going to do is switch over here to grid. Let me make sure, get the system usage out of the way. That I'm looking at bars and beats. Perfect. Alright. So I'll just start out, listen to a couple of these just to get an idea. Alright, perfect. Alright, so that's my intro. Let's get a verse going. Alright, now what I'm going to do is grab it, duplicate it, but what I'm going to do after this is switch over to a chorus. So I'm going to add in a fill here, show you. Alright. So I've got these 4 bars for the verse. However, with the fill is 1 bar. So what I'm going to do actually is go in here, take out make the window the more appropriate size. Get rid of this for a second. Alright. So here we have our verse. I'm going to take out the last group of samples of the MIDI notes. I'm going to move the fill in. by grabbing all these. Show you how that sounds. Great. Switch back over, bring up the Superior Drummer. So that was our verse. We'll just have a chorus part now. All right. Pull this over. I'm going to duplicate this and actually make our chorus part 4 bars. And then, just like before, I will add in a fill now. Make sure this is lined up. In this first hit on the hi-hat, I'm actually going to move down to the ride cymbal so that it goes better with the chorus. Let's listen. Great. So that's going to be the MIDI performance I'm going to use. You know, that should hopefully give you some ideas about building up a drum performance. I'm not going to go and build a whole song right now. Just give you a quick example that I can use for the rest of the video to show you about mixing. So there are a couple different ways that I like to mix drums in Pro Tools with these kind of drum libraries. So what you can do with Superior Drummer is add in effects and different kinds of routing for like parallel compression and stuff like that inside of Superior Drummer. You know, there are different things, EQs, gates, compressors, things like that built into the library. However, my preference is actually to take all the sounds from Superior Drummer, bring them into Pro Tools on individual tracks, and then mix inside of Pro Tools with all the great plugins that I've purchased. So, you know, you might as well take advantage of those if you can, rather than using the ones inside of the library. Not to say that they're bad or anything, but my preference is to use the other ones. So I'm going to be using Waves plugins today. I have a couple different packages from them, the Gold Bundle, the SSL Bundle, CLA compressors, but I'm going to mainly focus on using some things from the Gold Bundle today. Also going to use the NLS, nonlinear summer plugins, and also the Kramer Tape. I really like those for drums. So, just a few things. What you can do in Pro Tools is set up some auxiliary tracks, and then route the samples from Superior Drummer the sounds on individual channels out to those auxiliary tracks. I've done that in another video, so you can check that out if you want to do that. Something that's nice about Superior Drummer is they have this pretty good bounce feature set up, where you can send the samples out to separate audio tracks that then can be mixed inside of Pro Tools. You know, you could do this yourself with the other drum libraries by creating audio tracks and then record arming them and setting up the input to be coming from the different drum libraries. But Superior Drummer will do this for you basically. But before I get to that, I want to show you a few things that I like to do inside of Superior Drummer to kind of prepare for it coming out. Just some preferences that I have. So if we look at our mixer, some of the things are that I actually like to bring down the cymbals a little bit in the overhead mic. Even around like 2 dB is usually my between 2 or 3 dB. It's usually good. Alright, same thing with the kick. Oops. I'll usually bring the kick down a little bit. And then same thing, actually for the ambient mics, I like to bring the cymbals down a lot. So I'm going to go in and bring them down closer to 7 dB. Alright. And for same thing with a kick, bring it down a fair amount. And I'll actually take the hi-hats out of the room mic. And so with Superior Drummer, the Avatar library, they give you 3 of these stereo ambient tracks. One's far, one's mid, close, obviously. Then they have these mono ones. In the initial setup, the only if you watch here, the only ones that are activated is really the overhead and the ambient one, and then these other ones aren't even being used. Alright, what I'm going to do is just use this ambient mid track for snare, and kind of use it as a just a reverb track for the snare drum, and then I'll shape it later on when I'm doing some mixing. So I just want the snare to be coming in on that one and not anything else. I guess that's really it. The next step is to get ready for the bounce. I guess if you want to, maybe I'll pick out which instruments I want to use, because if you look at here, you get a decent variety of drums that you can use. So I'll just play this back and let you guys hear different examples. I think I'm definitely going to switch over to the clear heads for the toms. So there's coated heads and clear heads. I really like the clear heads generally. And then I'll try out the different instruments and just play it back and let you hear. hopefully you can hear, just in the standard library for Superior Drummer, there's, decent variety of drum sounds. I really like this one for just a standard pop rock drum sound. I'm going to go in and edit this a little bit because I want some more cymbals going on. So this hit. Use this cymbal. Alright, so that's a decent performance. Let me then show you how you can turn these the MIDI file into audio tracks that can be mixed just like you would if you recorded an acoustic drum set. So I'm going to go back to Superior Drummer. Right now I've just set it up. I'm going to play back the samples with Superior Drummer in bounce mode so that it can pick up the MIDI notes that it's going to use. Here we go. Cool. Now for the output, I just want to use the bleed that I've set up. So I'm just going to use that because I went in and changed the bleed levels around for the cymbals and the kick drum and stuff like that. So I'm going to hit bounce and take you through that. So here's my folder that I have set up. I'm going to just the Pro Tools session I have is right here. I'm going to go into audio files, click open. This is where the tracks are going to be bounced to. Alright, so the next step is to come back here into Pro Tools and go to Import Audio. And these are the files that were recorded. So you can go over here, bring them all and convert all over here. These are the ones that are going to be imported. So I selected all those. Now I'm going to convert them to be used. And finally click done and open. Now there's about to be a dialog box that comes up here after these are done being processed. That'll ask me whether I want to import them as a new track or in the region list. So the region list you would see over here if I was on the edit window that it doesn't create new tracks. So you would have to go in for each of those tracks, create new ones, and then drag and drop the audio files into there. I'm just going to go ahead and click new track. Alright, and then you see automatically that these are named. And I'm going to rearrange them a little bit just so it has the same ordering in that they were in Superior Drummer, and also that I would typically like to use anyway. So bring the snares over here, then bring the hi-hats. Actually, I'll do toms next. And the hi-hats, then overhead. Alright. Now, if I switch back over to the edit window, you can see that now these are audio files rather than the MIDI files. I'm going to, just for the sake of consistency, go in and align these, even though you don't have to do that. Alright. Now, because I'm not going to be using Superior Drummer to play them back, what you can do is make this track inactive, and so then your computer doesn't have to process it while you're mixing down, so you can, in theory, use more plugins and stuff like that because Superior Drummer's not taking up CPU. Alright, so now I can play it back. And these are the audio files, like you would if we recorded, an acoustic drum kit. You can mix them the same way now. You can just listen to the hi-hat. Cool, right? Okay. Let me switch back over now to the mix window because I'll just use this the rest of the time. Alright, so I have it set up here with all the individual tracks, stereo tracks over here, the mono tracks for these other ones. I'm going to do just some quick panning with the toms and the hi-hat to get the general idea about the stereo field. Keep the other things in the center and these band wide stereo. I'm going to view because I know I'm going to use a fair amount of inserts. I'm going to add in those extra inserts here because I know I'm going to use those. The first thing I like to do when mixing is to drums like this is actually to do a little bit of subtractive equalization on the tracks. I'm just going to go ahead and add in Q4 as just a plugin now to use right off the bat to do track by track, very focused subtractive equalization, where the idea is to go in and find frequencies that you don't like and pull those out. I like to do this right away so that all the other processing after this isn't really the processing isn't taking place on these frequencies in the signal that I don't really like. So I like to use the Q4 or any of the equalizers from the Q10 package because they are really CPU light. You can be very focused with the Q values all the way up to close to 100, which is great. If you really want to do very precise, I actually find that usually it's not a good idea to go all the way that high with the Q settings. If you also look, depending on your DAW, I'm running in Pro Tools 8 right now. I haven't upgraded to 9 or 10 because Pro Tools 8 does everything I need it to do. This version of Pro Tools doesn't have automatic delay compensation, and so that's something most DAWs nowadays actually have it, so you don't have to really worry about individual plugins having different delays that they add into the signal. But one thing I like about the Q series, Q10, and I'm using Q4 here, only 4 bands of equalization because I don't need 10, is that it doesn't add any. Now I know plugins I'm going to add later on will add delay, but as long as I watch this, make sure that the tracks all have the same amount of delay, then it's not a problem about your snare mic coming in ahead of your overhead mic or your overhead mic coming in ahead of your snare mic. So that's just something to be aware of depending on your DAW and the plugins that you're using is the processing delay. So here's Q4, and what I'm going to show you is how I like to do subtractive equalization, and I do it on an individual track basis, so I'll just solo the kick, And what I'll do is boost initially with a pretty sharp Q, sweep the frequency until I find frequencies that I don't like. Now, basically what I'm listening for, if you've never done this before, is kind of where the frequencies start to resonate a little bit. However, what I'm looking for is resonances that are not good. So there's when you sweep and you have anything from drums or even instruments, there'll be resonances that are come about because of like the fundamental frequency of the signal that's coming into it, or maybe some harmonics related to that fundamental frequency. You don't necessarily want to pull out frequencies that resonate just because they resonate, but you want to find the ones that kind of pop out in a bad way when you're listening to it. So this is kind of a subjective thing. However, if you think about what instrument you're doing this to, it might give you an idea, an intuition about, okay, this is a kick drum and I find a resonance around 60 hertz or 80 hertz. You don't want to pull that out. That would be something that's good. However, if you get up to 200, 300 hertz and you hear some things, that's probably a good idea to pull out for the kick drum. So let me just play this back and listen to this is the in mic on the kick drum, and then I'll pull out a couple different frequencies that I don't like. Right away, that's one that I found. Hopefully you're listening on decent headphones or stereo speakers and can hear. Now, you have to be careful a little bit with your Q setting. If you make it too sharp, you'll either hear almost nothing will resonate, or you'll have the problem that everything will resonate. So you want something in the middle. Even this is kind of a high Q setting. So that's just something to practice and listen for. And maybe one more up around 2 or 3K. All right, now we can listen to bypass and see, are we doing anything? Are we helping it? It's subtle, but hopefully that's helping a little bit. Later on, I'm going to be boosting, some of these frequencies that are around this frequency range. And you might be wondering, why are you pulling these out if you're going to add them in later on? Well, later on, I'm going to, use much wider Q settings. These are very sharp to pull out very specific frequencies. I'm going to be boosting over a larger range to hopefully, even if I'm boosting these frequencies like 2800 that I don't really like, by boosting all the frequencies around it, then it doesn't overemphasize these frequencies that I've determined that I don't like. All right, so that's the first microphone. I'm going to go ahead and do this for some other ones as well very quickly. Alright, moving on to the sub mic. Now with this one I won't pull out as many frequencies just because there's a lot of energy in the low frequencies but not a lot in the high frequencies, so there's not as many frequencies I feel like I need to pull out. Alright, now moving on to the snare. I know that there's part of the performance where the snare isn't taking place, so I better just focus on that loop during those times. Alright. Switch back over to the mix window, pull up the next Q4. So this mic is one that's already been heavily compressed. Hopefully you can tell that's a top mic. I'll switch between this top mic and the other one, and you can hear how this one's been pretty heavily compressed, as a pretty sharp attack on it already compared to the other one. So that was, this is a track that was printed in Superior Drummer with compression on it to be used. So that's a good thing or a bad thing. I guess that's up to you whether you want to mix it in or not. going to switch over here to the hi-hats. Make sure I'm just on the part that has a hi-hat. Alright, I guess it's the whole time. Alright, now overheads. One thing you have to be careful about with overheads is you have a lot of different instruments going into it. So you have to think about what are frequencies that you want to take out, or what are frequencies that you shouldn't be taking out. So like for instance, maybe you want to add in that some extra kick drum from the overhead, so you wouldn't want to pull out some lower frequencies. However, you know, a lot of times with overheads, people will cut the lower frequencies to take out the kick drum. It's just a matter of what your preference is. Alright, quickly move on to the rooms, and I'll come back to the toms. So this is the part that I only want to just has snare, so I want to just loop it over this part. So again, this room mic, I just used the snare board from. I didn't have any other instruments going to this one, because what I'm going to do is use it kind of as to control the reverb on the snare. I want to do that independent from a lot of the other instruments. In a lot of situations, I want the snare to have, I don't want to have to boost the reverb on my cymbals or other instruments like the kick drum. If I want more reverb for the snare, a lot of times I don't necessarily want to do that for other instruments, so that's why I have it as a separate track. Closer ambient track that has kick drum, snare, and overheads on, or cymbals on it. Alright. I'm going to move on to the toms here. They're only in a couple of locations. So I'm going to use this one actually to mix the three. Right, next one. Now, just so you guys know, this kind of equalization is very dependent on the sound source. So it's not like if you're mixing, toms, that you would pull out these kind of frequencies on every single tom. It's really dependent on so many things: the specific drum that's being used, the microphone that's being used, the room that it's in. All those things are a factor. So you wouldn't want to just copy my frequencies and cue settings and stuff like that for your toms unless you're using the same exact kit and you like what it's doing. That's just something to be aware of. It's really trying to find the find any trouble spots and take those out right away before you do any more mixing. So now I'm going to go ahead and get a rough mix going. Here we go. You usually don't need a whole lot of hi-hat. I usually like to keep it down pretty far. I mean, one thing you can do, just hear what we've done so far. It's probably going to be subtle, but you can bypass these and then immediately I like the results. It's subtle, but it adds some clarity. It takes out a lot of the muddiness to it, and I haven't even done, things like really EQ'd the kick drum and the snare to bring out, the body and the punch of those drums. Just this kind of subtractive equalization has already, to my ears, really helped the mix. The next thing I'm going to do is add in the Waves non-linear summer track plugin on each of these tracks and get that fired up. The one specific reason for doing this kind of subtractive equalization right away, even before you use the Waves NLS, is the Waves NLS adds some harmonics in. And so these frequencies, not only would you have to be, if you tried to do this kind of subtractive equalization after NLS, what would happen is these resonant frequencies that I don't really like, that I've decided to pull out, not only would those frequencies be present in the signal post NLS if I hadn't taken them out beforehand, but also their harmonics would also be present. And seemingly those harmonics would also not be very pleasing, and I'd want to take those out as well. So that's why I did it before the NLS added harmonics. I took out those frequencies that I didn't like, so that I didn't have to take those frequencies out later, and also there wouldn't be harmonics related to those frequencies that I didn't like would also be louder, and I'd have to worry about that. So that's why I always immediately do this kind of subtractive equalization. Alright, so next, add in the NLS. So Shift Option will add in, at least initially, the now that I've got these highlighted out at the bottom, NLS channel. It'll bring it up on the mono tracks. Then you'll have to go into these other ones that are stereo. Harmonic, plugins, channel. Alright, so we've got NLS going. The main controls of the plugin are to switch between different consoles that the individual channels have been modeled on. So this is an SSL channel, an EMI channel, and a Neve channel. And you can control the drive, so that's kind of harmonics that are being added in the nonlinear processing of analog desks that are adding harmonics in. You can assign them to different groups. I'm actually going to skip using the groups when I go through and set the things, set the plugins. You can add 20 dB that kind of add some crunch in, but I don't really want to do that with the drums because it's pretty a fair amount of crunch added in. Then you can control the output volume. For these stereo channels, there's this dual mono switch. What it does is these are stereo tracks. So if you look at the plugin, there are individual channels. So here there are 32 different Neve channels that were modeled. If you run this as a stereo plugin, you have the option of having the left and the right channels being identical models. So this would be channel 11 identical models, or you can switch to dual mono. Then it would be like two of these different channels. one would be for the left and another one would be for the right. So that's the difference between stereo and dual mono. Alright, so let me go through. I'll play around a little bit with the different desks, but for this particular example, I know I'm going to go ahead and use the EMI desk. I really like that for the drums. It's a little bit more dramatic in the low end. Especially I like that for the kick drum and for the, the kit in general. For drums, the other ones sound great too. I just am going to use this one because of that, and you can hear how it sounds. As far as the drive goes, it's easy to go overboard with this plugin. I usually only bring it up around 3 or 4 is all you really need. Even without adding anything in above 0, you're adding some harmonics in. So I'll go through and get them all set up to how I like them, and then bypass it while we're listening to it so you can hear what the plugin's doing. So this is shift option, right click, and then bypass, and I'll switch back and forth. So it's subtle. It's not doing a whole lot, but it's just doing enough to make an audible difference, and that difference can make a lot of difference actually when it's spread out across your whole mix, across all these tracks. I don't want the plugin to be doing too much. I'll solo the overhead and show you what the drive sounds like if you change it to more extreme settings. Alright, so hopefully you could hear a little bit about what was going on there. The other ones, the SSL and the Neve, are also great options to use. And later on, I'm going to talk about using the NLS bus plugin as well. So just look forward to that. Next, what I usually like to use is the Kramer Tape plugin. So again, shift option, load it across the tracks, Actually, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to just copy and paste it because usually the settings are a little bit different than I like to use. And so rather than having to go in and change it on every single one, I'm going to just make the first one and copy and paste. I think that'll be faster. Bringing up the Kramer tape. Right away, I know I don't like the wow and flutter. Some people like it. It's something that I don't want to necessarily mess around with. But the main controls of the plugin are this input and output. You can link them so that when you turn the input up, it turns the output down, so you can kind of maintain the same volume throughout the processing. You can add in noise. You may or may not be able to hear that. I don't want to necessarily add in a whole lot of noise. You can, though. Change the tape speed. And what this does, the slower tape speed kind of gives a boost to the low end. So sometimes I'll like to use this for the kick drum. But I know I'm going to have plenty of low end based on the processing that I'm using. So, sometimes I'll switch over and use it. What I also really like to use this for, maybe I'll do this in another video, is the 7.5 inches per second setting is great for electric guitars, especially like ones with a decent amount of overdrive or distortion. So maybe I'll demo that in another video so you can hear how that sounds. The metering, you can look at the input and output metering. I'm not going to add in, these are all for if you want to add tape delay to it. I think that's a cool setting that's not really on a fair amount of the other tape emulation plugins to have this delay, so I think that's pretty cool. You can change the bias, change the sound a little bit. I usually use the over bias. This flux right here is kind of how you control the tape saturation, or the tape compression that goes on. That's really what people know the sound of tape for, besides wow and flutter and noise and stuff like that. It's really, and that's what I want to use the tape plugin for, is to add a little bit of compression. And the tape also does some good things for the transients of the drums. In the saturation really is present in the attack and the transient of the drums, and the flux is how you can control that. I usually don't use a whole lot. I don't, these really high settings are more extreme. They're good in some cases, especially for like special effects. You kind of have to control this, and it works together with the input record level. So you can hear, if you drive the input record level, I'll do it on the kick drum here, that what ends up happening is there is some kind of tape saturation that's taking place. I've read some things on the Waves website where they suggest trying to bring up the level to around the 0 right here, and then control the saturation with the flux. That's not to say that you can't get some nice things just by driving the input without the flux as well. So I'll play around with that a little bit and give you an idea of where it can sound, and then I'll pick where I would typically use it just for a normal drum kit. You can hear it saturating there a fair amount. I think that's pretty nice sound for tape saturation. And I actually think I have a couple of other different tape emulation plugins, and I actually like the saturation best on this plugin, the Kramer Tape. So if you're, want to use it for some kind of special effect, I definitely recommend the Kramer Tape plugin for that. Now, I had the input and output linked before, but because I'm adding a little bit of compression, I unlinked them, boosted the output a little bit to bring it up just for gain staging sake over here. I'm going to link them together, so now they're set that way. Next thing I'm going to do is start copying and pasting this onto the other tracks, but then also looking at the input levels, I copy and paste them over. Alright, so what has a Kramer tape done? I'll bypass it and show you that, and it's not doing a whole lot, but it's just doing just like the NLS, just enough to make a pleasing difference. So where have we come so far? This is what it sounded like before we did any of the processing. So without doing any EQ, any compression so far, anything like that, we've already improved the mix to my ears a fair amount. Using the Kramer tape, what it also does is it prepares the tracks a little bit more for compression, and it means you don't have to compress things as hard to really get them to punch, to really get them to stand out in the mix. So that's another good thing about using these kind of tape emulations is they kind of go well together with compressors because they are adding in a little bit of saturation, a little bit of compression automatically as part of the tape modeling. So the next thing I like to do is do some compression. There are people that like to EQ before they have compression in their signal chain. There's other people that like to compress before they do the EQ. They're each a little bit different, and you can experiment and try out whichever you like. I find that I like to put the compressor first, and what usually happens is I have to EQ things less. I don't have to boost things as much or cut things as much afterwards if I compress first, because if I EQ first, then the compressor's gonna compress the parts that I've already EQ'd, so I have to maybe boost them more to get the same kind of the level that I'd hope to achieve, the sound I'd hope to achieve. So the compressor I'm going to use today is the Waves H comp. So I'll bring that up. I want to talk a little bit about the kind of compression I'm going to use. So now that I have the audio files, I'm going to go in and talk a little bit first here. Let's look at one of the kick drum hits. I'll zoom in on this so we can look at it. Let me make the track larger. And hopefully this will help you, if you're not that familiar with compression, to get an idea about how this works. I'm going to zoom in on the track a little bit more to bring it up the size. Perfect. All right, so there's different controls on a compressor. Typical ones you would see are things like the threshold, the attack, the release, the ratio. These things are all a little bit different, and they work together, so you have to kind of play around with each and try things out depending on what you're trying to do. But the first control is the threshold, and that really sets the so the compressor in general is a dynamics processor. It changes the volume. You can use it to change the volume for like in drums, you could change the entire drum hit volume. However, that's not typically what you want to use it for. What you want to use it for is to change the volume of different parts of the waveform relative to other parts. So what I'm going to be doing is changing the attack transient amplitude relative to the sustain of the signal. That way what you can do is bring down this initial attack, the volume, a little bit, so that then you can bring up the rest of it and have the overall volume be louder. So what you have to do is set a threshold where how it works is if the waveform or the signal is above the threshold, the amplitude is higher, then that's when the compressor will decrease the volume. However, when the waveform is below the threshold, then the compressor is not decreasing the amplitude or having any gain reduction going on. So I like to say that you should compress with a purpose. My purpose is to bring down the transients a little bit so that the overall volume can be louder. However, a different thing that compressors are used for is to kind of accentuate or highlight the attack of a signal, and then kind of bring down the tail or the sustain of a drum hit. So the way that you do that is to use different attack and release settings. So when you're trying to change the gain or the amplitude of the transient here, what you would want to do is use a really fast attack and a really fast release. And what that's going to do is, if you set your threshold correctly, there will only be a part of the waveform above the threshold where the compressor's decreasing volume. The only part above it will be that initial transient. The rest of the time, the waveform is below the threshold, so it's not being processed. So what happens with a fast attack is that as soon as the signal's energy goes above the threshold, then the compressor is going to start decreasing the amplitude. Then with a fast release, as soon as the signal goes below the threshold, then the compressor is going to stop decreasing the amplitude. However, if I were to change that around, set the threshold based on the transient amplitude to kick on, but then use a slow attack time, and then maybe a longer release time, what would happen is, so the energy in the transient would go above the threshold. That would tell the compressor that it needs to start working. However, because I have a slow attack time, the compressor won't start decreasing the gain or the amplitude of the signal until a little bit later on after the transient, because the attack time, it takes a while for the compressor to start decreasing the amplitude. Then with a long release time, also the compressor will continue to decrease the amplitude throughout the remainder of the signal, so that what ends up happening is the transient or the hit of the signal stays at its present volume, and then the rest of the signal, if you set it correctly, will be decreased. And what that ends up doing is making the transient louder relative to the amplitude of the other parts of the signal. There are different ways to also do that. I just discussed two different ways of doing compression based on setting the threshold relative to the transient, so that the transient is the only thing that goes above the threshold. However, if you use a lower threshold so that a lot of the waveform or the energy in the signal is above the threshold, then you can do different things as well. But I'm going to go ahead and start compressing the kick drum, where I'm using a fast attack, fast release to just bring down the transient a little bit of the signal so that the overall level can be brought up a little bit. The H-comp has a couple other features besides these general ones. The ratio, it tells you how much. A larger ratio means that it's going to compress things more. Lower ratio means it doesn't decrease the volume or the gain as much. So the punch allows some transients to go through, even though you're compressing. That will, I guess it sort of speaks for itself. However, I usually don't like to use the punch. Some people like to. I don't. The mix changes between uncompressed signal and fully compressed signal, and so you can blend them together. This is one way of doing parallel compression inside of the plugin, where you don't have to create separate tracks. However, I usually, when I do parallel compression, specifically do separate tracks because I don't want the full mix to just be compressed, to be heavily compressed, and mix between that and the full mix uncompressed. So you'll see that later on, but so I usually just use the the mix as fully compressed. You can control the output. You can have a limiter on it in case you're worried about clipping. And there's this analog dial where you select different kinds of analog, I don't know, color that you add into the sound. I'll go through each of these when I'm doing the compressor just so you can hear a little bit how they sound. 2 is the default. The third one I can definitely tell adds kind of a high cut. It has some kind of low pass filter on it or something like that. You can hear the different ones. The fourth one I feel like brings out more sustain. I looked at the user manual on the Waves website and doesn't really give you an idea of really what kind of color that these things are trying to, each setting really adds in, so you have to listen to it for yourself. But those are the things that I picked up on from listening to it. And with the release, you can sync the release, and I like to use this later on when I'm compressing the overheads in the rooms, and so you'll see me use it later on. But for now, I just want to use a fast attack, fast release, so I don't sync that to the host or to a specific beat per minute or anything like that. So let me get started with a kick drum. Solo that. All right, bring down this a little bit. So hopefully you can see I've set the threshold that it only the compressor kicks on very quickly every time there's a solid drum hit, and it does some quick compression and then quickly turns off. I've used a fairly low ratio because I don't need a whole lot of compression when I'm doing this. What I'm really just trying to do is control the dynamics of the drum hits, get the transients under control, and maybe increase the overall perceived level of the drum hit as well. All right, let me quickly move on to the other instruments and get them compressed as well. Switch over to the mix. All right, I'm going to copy this one over. Just level up this one down. Too much. Actually, I decided what I'm going to do with this one is the opposite, is to have a slow attack so that I'm squishing more of the tail of it and letting the transient through. So this is what I was describing before, where I want to bring out the transient, the attack more of the hit. So this is the sub mic. There's not going to be a whole lot of attack on it, but I'm not really concerned too much about the sustain because I want that low end punch to come through mostly during the attack part. All right, that's good. Snare top. I'm going to go back and use one of these ones with this fast attack, fast release. It's working fine. Bring the ratio threshold a little bit more. snare effects. So this is the one that's already compressed. I actually don't want to compress it, so I'll just do that. Turn that analog color off. Alright, toms. Oops, I want to use one that's compressing. I'll come back to these in a second. Get the hi-hat. Overheads. Now with the overheads, I actually don't want to use a fast attack. I want the hit to come through, same kind of like what I was describing before. I don't want a lot of compression on the overheads either. Some people will really compress them. I don't like to do that. Just a really low ratio. Slow attack to let the transient through. So there's like the low pass filter I was hearing. More sustain. All right. Same thing with this snare reverb mic. I'm going to compress it a little bit more. Maybe show you what it's with this one. Compress it a fair amount. With the threshold. And then what I'm actually going to do is use the mix knob to bring in. I'll sync this to the host, the release, so that it's releasing at the same tempo as the song. So I'm compressing it a pretty fair amount, but I'm going to mix back in now the uncompressed signal so you can hear how that sounds. I'll sweep between it. Like it right about there. Same thing I'll use on the ambient room track. All right. All right, so let me bypass all these so you can hear what I've done now with just compression. So hopefully what you can hear is I've added in a nice little bit of squish or something to compress the transient so that it sounds thick. It sounds it hits hard because you add that compression in. What I'm gonna do here is also add in some things. I forgot to do the compression on the toms. Let me switch over, find a part for that. Quickly knock those out. What I want to do though here is, I don't always do this, but with these samples, what I sometimes like to do is add a gate on that. What it does is control the sustain a little bit more of the waveform of the signal. And what I want to do is emphasize the attack more of the transient, even though I've squashed it to keep it a little bit under control by using compression. What I want to do is bring down the very last tail of it by using a gate or an expander, and I'll do that on the kick and the snare, and so I'll show you how to do that next. Alright, so I'm going to be using the Wave C1 gate. It comes as part of the C1 compressor. I'm just going to bring up the gate part. With a gate, what you're doing is gate or expander, you're decreasing the volume of the signal during part of it, and letting the amplitude go through, the signal go through during other parts. What I want to do is just take off a little bit of the, if you listen to it at the end, there's a little bit of a woofiness to the kick drum if I make the release really long so that the gain reduction isn't really kicking in, and I bring down the release. Bring up the attack, because I want it to, as soon as the signal goes above it, I want the gate to allow it to go through. Bring the release a little more. I like that. Now listen to it. Just tighten it up, just that hair amount at the end. I think will make a big difference when it's sitting in the mix. By bringing that release down, that tail of the kick drum is being decreased in volume, and that means that the kick drum punch is more present. I'll do that for the other ones as well. Just this mic. Want a little bit more sustain for that out mic. This is the microphone that's on the outside of the kick drum, because it adds more of the sustain of the drum that I want to keep in there. It's more dramatic on this one, what I'm taking out. I think that will really help in the mix. Do a little bit on the sub mic. I compressed it initially already to kind of emphasize the attack more, bring the release. So it's really thickening things up during the initial attack, but then after that the sustain, if it lasts too long, then it can just muddy up the mix. Alright, same thing with the snare. We have to be careful with the snares. There's a lot more ghost notes going on, and I think it's all right if the ghost notes don't always go through the direct mics. They'll be picked up by the overhead, and that's fine with me. If that's all they're coming through, then it'll emphasize the main hits more. All right. So you can hear that there's some kick bleed coming through, and that's part of the the signal from the superior drummer that they put out, and that doesn't actually bother me. I think that it'll add some more realism to the drum performance by having that kick bleed in there. Doesn't mean I don't want to take out some sustain though of the snare and the kick. So you can hear this gate's, doing a fair amount of work. All right. All right, let's do the toms as well. Switch back over to that. This part that has the tom hits. So you can hear that it's doing a lot, and to my ears, it really helps bring out the punch of the toms, which is very important. But make sure that they don't, hang around in the mix too long to make it muddy. That's great. Same thing with the other toms. Just have to make sure that this threshold is set properly. Oops, I'm doing the wrong one. Something that I probably just had the setup that it cuts off the sustain that I want to hear to set it. So you got to be careful of that. All right, that's good. All right, let's go back and look at what our mix is at. So I should have highlighted the whole thing first. All right, let's listen to it. I'll bypass the gates so you can hear how they're cleaning the mix up a little bit. Another thing that I like to do on the overheads and the ambient tracks are to add in the waves imager, and I won't do this on the snare track and the kick drum because they're mono tracks, but I think that it really makes the drums larger than life. If you add this kind of effect in subtly, where it makes the mix wider, and I'll play it for you. Just so that's if you make it a mono signal, basically. That's wider than I want it to be. Do the same thing for the other tracks. So I'll just highlight these tracks and I'll bypass the imager so you can hear how it's just subtly making the very subtly making the mix a little bit larger, a little bit wider. Alright, that's great. The next thing I'll do is EQ. You know, all this we've done so far without really even shaping the sound, and the drum mix is starting to come together for me. So we'll start with the kick over here. I'm going to use the V EQ 4. I like to use the 4-band EQ for individual mixing, the 3-band EQ for the bus mixing, and I'll use that. I'll show that one to you later on. For the kick drum, right away, I know I'm going to cut below 47 Hertz because I don't want it to be anything that's going to be inaudible for the kick drum to be coming through any of those really low frequency signals on the mix. I'm going to boost at 56. You can boost a fair amount. And I'm going to use, instead of a low shelf, I'm going to use this like a bandpass bump. So already on the low end, what I've been able to add in is pretty dramatic. Maybe a little too much. I'm going to be cutting now around 270, 330 is usually what I'm looking for. Then you can switch between this high Q, which means that you're cutting a narrower range of frequencies. But for kick drum, I usually want to sweep out a fair amount of that low boxiness in the signal, right around 330 and 270. Sometimes on the kick drum, I'll cut another frequency, but I've already done some fair amount of subtractive synthesis, or subtractive equalization. So I'm going to add in some of the beater hit of the drum, around 3K. That's all I need. I'm going to make sure I don't have too much high end going by using a high cut at 12K, then add in just a little extra air to make it really click at the top. And so between 6.8K and 12K, I'm boosting like with a shelf, but by cutting at 12K, it means that there's not any things excessively high as part of the kick drum. Same sort of thing for the out mic. I'm even going to copy it over because I know it's going to be close. And then it's kind of pillowy or fluffy. I don't want that in my kick drum. Much better. Now for the sub mic, I know I don't want to add in these kind of high frequencies to it. I really just want that low end to be boosted. I'm even going to bring this down to 27 hertz so I can, any low frequencies that are in there are still going to be present. I'm going to switch this off so I can go up to 100 hertz here for the low shelf, boost everything between 100 hertz and 27 hertz. I'm still rolling off a fair amount, but I'm going to move it up to 330. That's a little bit higher of the low frequencies that I'm taking out. Let's hear the kick drum all together. So it's really starting to punch compared to before. Let me bypass these so you can hear it. Added a lot of, that really helps the kick. Let's do the snare. Same thing, EQ4, snare. I know I don't want anything below maybe even up to 150. Shaping the low end here first. Too much beef. It's about right. All right. I'll think about where I want to cut, maybe around 470. Add some more clarity to it. Again, somewhere around here is where you're going to find the snap of the snare. Gotta watch the output, I guess I'm clipping. Same thing like before, add some air in, but make sure you don't too much high end. See what I've done. Perfect. For the snare sizzle, I'll probably add a little bit even more high end than had on the other one. I don't want to add in that extra body at the bottom. Alright, but I will. Did the wrong one again. Move on to this compressed mic. All right. Now I got the hi-hat. For the hi-hat, I want to definitely roll off as much low end as possible. Cut to 18. I don't want to worry about this. All right, now let's look at the overheads. Make sure the low end is in there. It's the body. Let's get the reverb. As I'm listening to this reverb mic, I hear that I want to take out, use a gate to take out some of the sustain. I think that's better. So this floor controls how fast it's rolling off. That's better. All right. So look at what EQ has done for us. Too much here. All right, I just got to EQ this toms. Copy these over, and then I can see how I like it. Boost this a little more. Don't want to cut. Alright, let's hear our mix so far, and I'll show you what we've done each step along the way by bypassing it. So these are the sounds that came straight out of Superior Drummer. First step we did, add in some subtractive equalization to really bring out the clarity of the mix, find the parts that we didn't like. Next, add in some analog harmonics, distortion, subtle distortion by using the NLS. Add in some tape emulation. Compress the signal, saturate it a little bit. Beef it up a little bit. Compress it now to let it punch. Control the transients a little bit more so you can bring up the overall level. Use these the gate on the individual tracks to tighten it up so there's not this sustain isn't hanging around too long that muddies up the track. Add in the imagers as well to widen the mix. EQ it, really make it punch. Alright, last thing I'm going to do is do some bus mixing. So I'm going to create 3 AUX inputs. First one I'm going to call clean. Next one I'm going to call compress. Last one I'm going to call bus. What these are going to be is this first one here I'm going to use as a what I'm setting up here is for bus compression with these 2 plugins, or with these 2 tracks. I'm going to insert the V-Comp plugins here because I'm going to bypass the compressor, and the other one I'm going to heavily compress. I'm going to route instruments to them very specifically. I don't need an analog. Bring down the input. Actually, for this one, probably want to make it unity gain for the one that's not compressing. Alright. So these first 2 ones I'm setting up are going to be uncompressed and heavily compressed, parallel compression. Then I'm going to mix them together. Bring this down a little bit. So I'm going to take all these with Shift and Option and change the output to bus 1, 2. So all these are now being bussed here. Going through this V-Comp. So you might ask, why am I sending the signal through the V-Comp, but I'm not compressing, I'm not limiting, I've got the de-esser off and everything. If anything, I'm adding just a little bit of analog color to it, whatever that is, that Wave includes in the plugin. I'm doing that. I don't think it's going to hurt anything, so that's why I have it in there. Then the next one, I'm going to set this up instead of bus 1, 2, I'm going to set up as bus 3, 4. And how you do this parallel compression that I like, the way that I like to do it, is go back here on the individual tracks like the kick and the snares and the toms. I will add in parallel compression, or I'll add these sends to the compressor. I'm actually not going to send this one because it's already compressed from Superior Drummer. Add in these toms. And the last one I'll do is the overhead, and I'll do this one very subtly. With a V comp, you have to watch the input a fair amount. Going to kick the compressor on now. See, it does a fair amount of gain reduction already. I'm going to bring down the release a little bit. We're really here to start to squeeze on those kick drums. I like that a lot. I set these up as a pre-fader specifically so that what I do to the change down here doesn't affect the send, because I like to have the send be completely independent. All right, let's watch these. A little too much kick drum going through it for my taste, but I want more snare, so that's really being compressed. Still too much kick. Perfect. That's plenty of toms going through it. We'll bring up the overhead a little bit. Alright, 4-to-1 is plenty for me. That's a fair amount of gain reduction going on. Now let's start mixing this back in with the original signal that's uncompressed. Now what I want to do also is route these to the same bus over here. So I'm going to set this one up to be bus 5, 6, bus 5, 6. Mix this one in now. And you'll hear that how it really brings out the kick and the snare. It makes them punch. Last, I want to add some processing on this bus. So the first one is the NLS bus. So I talked about this a little bit before. This is the master bus model on the console. So the individual tracks that I used before, these channels are just individual channels that were modeled on the consoles. This one is the bus, the summing bus, and there's some nonlinear things going on with that. I'll let you research that on your own if you want to understand how that's working, what's going on there. So again, I'm going to use the EMI desk. I really like this one for drums. Let you hear what's going on with that. You have to watch the trim a little bit because you're boosting some gain with the drive. Next, I like to add the Kramer tape on here again. You know, I've used it on all the tracks, but for me, the best part about using these tape emulations is when they have like a summing effect where you're adding a little bit of the sound on the tracks, a little bit of the sound on the bus as well. So you have to watch the record level input gain on this now. So now's where I usually like to add in the VEQ3. Alright, I'm going to knock off everything below 45 Hertz. Then what I'm actually going to do is try and figure out if I want to go 100 Hertz or 60 Hertz. I'm going to boost the low end. I really like using this one as these really wide, with these really wide Q settings for boosting on the bus track rather than using the VEQ4. I use that a lot on individual tracks. That's a little bit more precise when I'm doing more cutting and boosting. You know, for the kick drum, I just want to boost a very specific low frequency range, and that's why I like to use that one. But for the bus, I like to boost in a couple different places, just as little as 1 dB or so. Usually 10K to add some little bit of air to it, just about, and then I'll usually play around with a couple different settings here to boost a little on the low end, and try and find a nice setting here for the drums where I'm bringing out a little bit more of that snap of the snare or the toms across the whole mix. Too much high end. You know, a little goes a long way. Even this, I can hear as dramatic. All right, next, a good way to plug in to use is a C4 bus compressor. What I really like for these drums is the Ross Hogarth drum bus. Usually, I'll bring up the threshold though, because it can be more dramatic than I want it to be, the effect. You know, if you're not really familiar with multi-band compression, I don't want to go into it too much in detail right now. It's already a pretty long video, so, but I'll just play around with it a little bit so you can hear what's going on. Lastly, throw on there the MV2. Really maximize your volume here on the mix. You know, if I'm going to be using these drums with a full mix, I want them to be loud across the whole performance. Very consistent volume. That way, if I need to turn them down, I'm turning everything down. But it's all pretty close to the same level throughout. One thing you have to watch is intersample clipping, so that's why I set the output to be about 0.2. That way, if there's, you know, the signal between samples is not going to clip. If I'm going to send this out now to the D to A converter. So I'll play it back and just bring the volume down to increase it. Those drums are getting to be pretty loud. And maybe a little bit too much high end. The snare. I'm going to back it off a little bit. Great. quickly go through what I've done so far, give you a chance to hear everything again. One last thing before I wrap up the video. So you can see how I've taken the sounds coming out of Superior Drummer, which is a great drum library. Has tons of different drum sounds. You know, it can be very versatile if you pick up a lot of this SDS packs, which I've had great experiences using the Metal Foundry one. I'm not a metal drummer. Don't make metal music, but I think that those drums were recorded really, really well, and they're very versatile. You know, even if you don't play metal, that you can use them for almost any style of music if you do the right processing with them. But this is the Avatar kit that I'm using here. The Roots kit also sounds great. You know, I'd recommend that one. It's less versatile, but it definitely fills a niche of music. But I use it on a lot of different stuff, from you know, anything that's a little bit has like a funk flavor to it, to pop music as well. The New York Volume 2 is great. And then a bunch of the Easy X's are also really great to have. So let's go through and I'll show you what we've done from the sounds that come straight out of Superior Drummer. These are what the unprocessed samples are like, and then I'll show you what I've done each step along the way. Pretty boring. I mean, these sound great, however, not going to sit very well in the mix. You know, to me, these drums have got a lot of punch to them. Not too much. They can be used for a lot of different styles of music. They got a nice snap to them as well. Can be very usable. You know, a bunch of different styles of music. This is pretty typical processing. You know, I've added things in subtly. I haven't, you know, boosted a whole lot in a lot of different places, or cut in a lot of different places, or over compress things or anything like that. Just a little bit of compression, a little bit of you know, special effects with the NLS channel and the Kramer Tape, a little bit of EQ, subtly with the VEQ, goes a long way, and then tap things off with a little bit of a limiter on the end to make sure everything's loud. So I'll play this out at the end. Thanks a lot for tuning into the video. Hopefully you picked up some tips and tricks. If you've got any recommendations, please write some comments on the YouTube page, and check back. I'll be making more videos. If you have any suggestions or want me to try out some different products, let me know. I'll be happy to post those for you. Take care.